With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. So we are presently then in the 9th chapter, and within the 2 sections of this chapter, which is all about how we effectively integrate, apply our commitment to the Bodhisattva path, having taken the Bodhisattva vow, we're looking at two approaches to generating this quality that we call bodhicitta, this magnanimous greatness of mind. And that's where we have one, the aspiration, we call that the bodhicitta of aspiration. And then we have which is generally what we would say, the wish to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And the second is the bodhicitta of action, or the bodhicitta of application. And that's then where we presently are looking at the way this is integrated by means of the 6 paramitas. And within the 6 paramitas, we're then looking at the paramita of concentration, or the paramita of samadhi or jhana. So in the root text, we're at 110. It says, discursiveness is present, gross and subtle, in the state of preparation for the first samadhi. But as this first samadhi supervenes, the gross departs and just the subtle stays. The other 3 samadhis are devoid of all discursiveness, gross, and subtle, and each of them makes ready for the one that follows. All are said to be the basis for the noble path. So then in Kangyur Rinpoche's commentary, let's just see here. He says, let's see. In each of the 6 types of attention occurring in the preparatory stage of the first samadhi, discursiveness, both gross and subtle, is present. So here we go into some subtle aspects of what the samadhi involves in terms of our, you could say, what is the content of the mind. And in general here, what it's referring to is, we generally operate within a culture where we're thinking about a number of things. And when we become meditators, then rather than be worrying about what's happening in the politics, what's happening down the street, what's going on in the world, and so on, then the mind is very much focused on the present process, just as if we're involved with something where there's a lot of attention that goes into something. Then here there's 6 types of attention that occurs. So that's referred to as mental engagement. So here, Kimbo-Yönten Gyatso, he says, this refers to the 6 types of attention. The mental factor of attention or mental engagement, Yila Cheba, means that the mind focuses steadily on its object. But we're not just talking shamatha here. It's more general in the sense of just where our attention is going. So, of course, as practitioners in the modern world, it's a little bit difficult with a lot of things that's going on. But anyway, we can appreciate that what the practice of meditation, when it's practiced as it should be, it really involves a greater degree of attention to exactly that process, that training. So it says here, the 6 types of attention are attention with regards to a correct understanding of the character of the lower and higher realms. This means to focus alternately through reflection on the peaceful character of the higher realm and the harsh character of the lower realms. So this essentially means priorities, knowing where this is going and what are the defects of not following through. Then there's Merba Yila Cheba, attention with regards to the appreciation of the qualities of the higher realms. This means that the earlier study deepens into shamatha and vipassana. So we're simply aware of where this is going. Wenpa yila cheba, attention with regards to the discarding of the afflictions. It occurs when one is in the process of eliminating the three greatest degrees of the emotions of the desire realms. So that's the gross forms of attachment, aversion, and ignorance. And that's simply just where we're attentive to how we're shedding these gross forms of conflicting emotions. Gawa duba yila chepa, attention with regards to the accumulation of joy. It means that through the absence of affliction, one enjoys a lesser kind of bliss. It is now that the medium degrees of the emotions of the desire realms are eliminated. And that's simply just referring to the process in which there's an awareness that one is beginning to have a different, you could say, psychology. There's more joy and there's less affliction. Then it's chöpa, yila chepa, attention in which the mind focuses steadily on the investigation. It means to examine whether one possesses such afflictions, thereby eliminating the lesser degrees of affliction in the desire realm. So that's again where there's less and less afflicted states of mind. And then jorwa eta yila chepa, attention that focuses on the fruit of the practice. And again, that's where there's the result of the practice, calm abiding, is sort of effectuated. So that's, yes, these were the 6 types of attention. So that's where, in terms of the first samadhi, this is what happens. So we've already been through the various samadhis, but then again, here's a little bit of a summary with regards to these particular 4 samadhis that we generally talk about. He says the remaining 3 samadhis are devoid of both gross and subtle discursiveness. The samadhis proceed in order, each preparing the way for the one following. The first lays the ground for the second, and so on. In the same way, the 4th samadhi is the preparation for the formless absorption of infinite space. So again, this is where we discuss these samadhis. Again, this is kind of a very refined degree of spiritual practice. And as much as we actually talk about the samadhis as being something we go beyond, it's also something where we need to appreciate this is a high degree of spirituality. And again, this is where in so many of the various traditions that we have, we hear about individuals that enter samadhi or have incredible spiritual, you could say, manifestations on the basis of these kind of samadhis. So as much as we're alerted to the fact that we don't want to be attached to these, they nevertheless are very powerful degrees of meditation. So with regards to that, then the 4th samadhi is then the preparation for the formless absorption of infinite face. This in turn is preparation for the second absorption, and these are again where we looked at these absorptions of the higher of the formless realms. For this reason, the 9 absorptions are referred to as the foundations of the path of seeing and meditation for the 3 kinds of noble beings: Shravaka, Pratyeka Buddha, and Bodhisattva. So these samadhis, as much as we don't get you could say attached to them, they nevertheless constitute the foundation of meditation and the capacity to remain absorbed or remain to have a deep degree of shamatha, deep degree of meditation. So with regards to these 9 absorptions, then there's just some classification here that includes then the 4 samadhis of form, the 4 formless absorptions, together with the absorption of cessation. This makes 9. Instead of the absorption of cessation, the Abhidhamma speaks of the preparatory stage, Nidok, of the first samadhi. Dörsem Tsechik, the one-pointed mind of the desire realm. So these are all samadhis that essentially constitute the foundations of deep absorption, where you could always, where we talk about these very often in terms of the worldly beings having these various degrees of absorption, but also here it constitutes the foundation for the Shravakas, Prateka Buddhas, and Bodhisattvas, especially when you add then the samadhi of the absorption of cessation, which is then the scope of the arhats. So this is a little bit going back to the foundations of meditation, and we're like we mentioned earlier, there are the kind of meditations of childish beings. And then there's the samadhi of what was it we had here? The childish beings, which are then the higher realms. And then there's the clearly discerning concentration. So then that constitutes then the vipassana that happens with the vipassana on the path of seeing. And then the highest kind is then the excellent concentration of the tathagatas, which is then the path of the higher bhumis. So then the qualities resulting from concentration. And here then the root text says, the concentration that engenders every perfect quality is pervaded by compassion and by primal wisdom. Through having many concentrations, one achieves the qualities of all the grounds and paths. Meditation and post-meditation, which share a single mental substance, eliminate duality of perceiver and perceived. Until the seventh ground is reached, practitioners arising from such meditative equipoise are dissipated in the period of post-meditation. So here's a bit more about the practice of meditation and post-meditation, where let's see here. Okay. Shamatha and Vipassana bring forth all the qualities of the paths and fruits of the three vehicles. So again, this is where we need to realize that Shamatha and Vipassana sort of constitute the red thread that runs through all the various Buddhist teachings, including also the Vajrayana. It says, the practice of shamatha renders the mind immovable and impervious to the wind of thoughts. It is, however, unable to uproot defilements. It is vipassana that eradicates the obscurations of ignorance and the belief in self. The Shravakas have more concentration than wisdom, whereas the Bodhisattvas have more wisdom than concentration. By contrast, the Tathagatas have both in measure. So that's where what we could refer to as the Hinayana is more about the concentration. The Bodhisattvas, they're more about the Vipassana, and that Vipassana comes more from their insight into emptiness and is less dependent on calm abiding. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, in particular, the concentration that produces all the qualities of the paths and fruit of the Mahayana is associated with a compassion for other beings and is linked with a supreme wisdom that is free from concepts. In proportion as practitioners gain in compassion and wisdom, they acquire the different levels of concentration that share the nature. Accordingly, meditators will accomplish all the qualities of the grounds and path of the extraordinary Mahayana and will discard all the obscurations. And again, that's where we need to appreciate that when we talk about compassion, we're also talking about vipassana in the sense that this is what essentially constitutes selflessness. So when there is the wisdom that is not held by the belief in a solid person and a solid object, then naturally also this absence of self brings about the unfolding of, you could say, Buddha nature's innate capacity that is not stuck in the duality of self and other. And as such, it possesses this natural warmth, which is compassion. And again, this is inseparable from wisdom in that this compassion is not the dualistic kind of compassion that thinks self and other. And of course, as then bodhisattvas, they progress through the bhumis, then they have increasingly less duality, increasingly less a notion of being someone who serves others. So here it says, when mastery is gained in this meditation, in which all non-existent phenomena of relative truth appear as an illusion, practitioners acquire the power in post-meditation to produce magical apparitions according to their wish. For this reason, they're said to possess mirage-like concentration, Jumataru Tingzen. When their concentration is perfect and able to overcome all adversity, and when it is accompanied by all the elements leading to enlightenment and displays the vast activities of Buddhahood, and is, in addition, immune to the fear of falling into a nirvana without a remainder, it is called fearless or heroic concentration. Power Droe Tingzen. Finally, they attain the diamond-like concentration, Dojitabu Tingzen, so-called because it is able to vanquish all obscurations, just as a diamond can break all other stones. So the first one is the one that you could say is all the sort of powers that we hear Bodhisattva might possess. The second has more to do with actually dedication to sentient beings. So that's why we sometimes talk this, the hero-like samadhi, and that's essentially the hero which is completely without, not in the slightest tempted to enter into nirvana, meaning leaving sentient beings behind. And then the final one is also called sometimes the Vajra jolt, which is this what finally breaks through the last kinds of duality. So here it says, the first concentration experience while the Bodhisattva is on the 1st to the 7th, meaning the impure grounds. The second concentration occurs while the Bodhisattva is on the pure grounds, the 8th to the 10th, and only at the end of the 10th ground is the third concentration attained. Accordingly, meditators will accomplish all the qualities of the grounds and paths of the extraordinary Mahayana and will discard all obscurations. So that's the benefit of meditation. There are two ways in which meditation or remaining in equipoise may be distinguished from post-meditation. The first way presupposes that they both possess the same nature. According to this perspective, as the mind rests one-pointedly in meditation, all gross movements of the mind and mental factors vanish and a state free of thoughts occur. This is meditation. So that's generally how we would understand the Bodhisattva resting in meditation in what we also call equanimity or equipoise. Throughout this experience, the sense consciousnesses are not arrested, but continue to function. Phenomena still appear, but there is no clinging to them. This aspect of clarity is regarded as post-meditation. So this is why we appreciate that a bodhisattva that's resting in equanimity is not cut off. It's not like they're in trance. They have perceptions, but that lack of fixating, lack of clinging, and having a clear understanding of the empty nature of phenomena, all the while that phenomena appear, then that understanding that is not held by any kind of fixation is then the meditation. Whereas the display that manifests, this refers to as the post-meditation. So that's why we say partaking of the one substance of the mind, meditation and post-meditation gradually eliminate dualistic thought of subject and object. So this is very often how we, for example, in the pith instructions that we have in the Vajrayana, we would understand meditation and post-meditation, simply just as the insight into the nature of phenomena, and with that, the understanding that all display arises without moving from that ground. So that's where we then refer to the display as post-meditation. A distinction is sometimes made between the terms duality of subject and object and dualistic thought of subject and object. So this is, of course, where we, in the Buddhist teaching, we talk about non-duality. So that's what comes up a lot. So it says here, while the apparent object which lacks inherent existence is the thing perceived. The apprehension or perception is regarded as the perceiver. So that's where we do have the experience. There might be the understanding that they're not two, but at the same time also there's a very clear distinction between whether the subject is confused or not confused. So that's where there has to be an awareness of with regards to the objects and the one that's perceiving. So also as a footnote, we'll say this is a complex topic, but at the same time, it's just only too obvious that we have an experiencer and an object perceived. So that's where here it says, this is the duality of subject and object. By contrast, the apprehension of an object of the 8 consciousnesses, form, and so forth. So that means any object that we perceive with the senses, as well as also thought objects, as well as also the afflicted mind, and also we refer even to the alaya, the ground of all, as an object. So that kind of apprehension of an object is the percept thought, while the apprehension of the thinking aspect of the 8 consciousnesses performing the perception is the perceiver thought. So again, we have, for example, we have a thought of something. Then of course the object, let's say we think of a cloud or we think of a tree. Then of course it's happening within the one that is thinking, but nevertheless the tree is the object. So that's the percept thought, and the consciousness, the thinker, then is referred to as the perceiver thought. There's a footnote on this. This complex subject is discussed at length in the Prajnaparamita Sutras. The distinction between percept thought and perceiver thought may perhaps be compared with the distinction made by Bertrand Russell between sense data and sensation. So again, we think of tree and we have the experience of being the one that thinks of tree. Yeah, or we think of something we really like, that's the sense data, and then the experience, I like that. The removal of duality and the removal of dualistic thought, these 2 categories here, right, amount to the same thing. When dualistic thoughts, those of subject and object, are discarded, duality is also discarded. Intelligent people should examine for themselves whether this is true. So this simply just means this refers to intelligent people, refers to all of us here. But it just means we should apply ourselves in actually discerning how this operates within the context of our own experience. The second way of distinguishing meditation from post-meditation presupposes that the 2 are different by nature. On the one hand, when the mind dwells one-pointedly in equipoise, this is meditation. When the meditator rises from this and engages in daily activities such as eating and sleeping, while never losing awareness that all is like an illusion, this is post-meditation. When in the course of such activities as walking or sitting, the 6 consciousnesses are carried away by outer objects, the practitioner is dissipated, meaning distracted. It is said that until they reach the 7th ground, even noble beings sometimes fall into this kind of dissipation. So this is more what you could say in the classical sense, understand as meditation and post-meditation, the idea that if you're sitting doing practice, that's meditation. When you get up and you are integrating your practice within ordinary life, then that's post-meditation. And it's within that post-meditation that it could happen that one is distracted, which in the case of someone like myself probably constitutes 99% of the time. But then again, even noble beings, up until what we refer to as the bhumis, the non-returning bhumis, they also have this. We sometimes, in the Dzogchen tradition, hear about great meditators who never get distracted. We talk about His Holiness Dudja Rinpoche, where we generally say, or as Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche tells us, since he was 11 years old, he was never distracted. I remember Nyushi Ken Rinpoche, he talked about one woman who received teachings from a great master, a great yogi called Kunga Palden. And in fact, Dingpo Khyentse Rinpoche wrote his life story. He was just someone who lived as a hermit, not so far from Derge in East Tibet. And this woman, when she was young, she received teachings from him and practiced with him under his guidance. And then circumstances led her to become married, and she then lived as the wife of within a context of being having a family and so on, and looking after cattle. Particularly, that you have large flocks of cattle. The Tibetan nomads keep a lot of yaks, which are the males, and then you have a lot of ji, which are the female yaks, and they get milked. And so part of her job every day was milking and boiling the milk from the ji. And after many years, one day she said to her husband, "I'm going to be passing away in 1 week. Could you seal off a section in the tent where I could sit and practice?" And the husband was just shocked. What are you talking about? And anyway, he did what she asked. And then the man's husband, this woman's mother-in-law, she came and said, "What is going on here? What are you talking about? You're passing away." And she says, "Well, there's clear signs and indications that I'm going to pass away in a week's time." And the mother-in-law said, "How can you know these things?" And she says, "Well, I've been a practitioner of the great perfection for a great many years, and this kind of awareness is sort of part of what I know." And the mother-in-law says, "Wait a minute, what do you mean you've been a practitioner of the great perfection? What are you talking about?" And then she told about how she had received teachings when she was young from Kunga Palden. And she said in all those years that she had lived with her husband and part of the community, she had actually never been distracted. She says only one time was she ever distracted. It was one night when the milk boiled over. So the nomads would have these big cauldrons where they then would boil, large quantities of the milk, and that boiled over one night. And she said that was that. But apart from that, she says in all these years, she was never distracted. So there are people like that. And incidentally, also Nyushi Khyentse said that when they cremated her, then she left bones that had the shape of Tara. So not an ordinary person. So there are beings like this. And then also beings for whom meditation and post-meditation are sort of completely fused within their practice. So this concludes then the paramita of concentration, the paramita of meditation. And now we're looking at then the paramita of wisdom, which is absolutely essential for our understanding of what we call the view. And that's where also it's important very often when we sort of engage in the path, we'd like to know what am I supposed to think, or what am I supposed to do, and how do I practice the path? And that's where, on one hand, we could know what is the practice, but it's also important for us to know what is it that we are dismantling? What is the critique? What is it actually that we're refuting in the practice of the path? So wisdom is not just something that we arrive at, sort of insight with regards to the nature of mind and so on. It also constitutes understanding what is not. So you can say it's the discerning between what is and what is not. And particularly it's understanding how phenomena that ordinarily we believe have true existence don't have that existence, don't have that reality. So that's where the paramita of wisdom is very much about us analyzing our assumptions, cutting through our beliefs, our naive beliefs. And it's not that we're supposed to become particularly clever and that we want to sort of develop something, some sort of superior quality, but it's more that we are stupidly falling for this our self-deception again and again. So that's where the paramita of wisdom constitutes this critique of our assumptions. And that's where there's a lot of emphasis on analysis to really be clear on what is the nature of phenomena. So sometimes one would hear, oh, emptiness, I could never understand emptiness. It's too deep and too big and too profound. But that's not at all true. That's only when we're talking about what we call the non-conceptual realization of emptiness. But of course, that's the scope of sublime beings. But until then, we have to actually subject our assumptions to analysis and be critical of what we assume, what we naively believe in. And that's where there's a large part of understanding the absolute, which is about our conceptual understanding of emptiness. There has to be a mental image. There has to be a clear understanding of how phenomena don't exist solidly the way we project onto them. And that's something that we arrive at through, you could say, analysis. And that analysis is guided then through the teachings. And that's why in the Buddhist teaching, there's so much emphasis on wisdom. And we shouldn't think that wisdom is then something just this very sort of cerebral, and because yes, it has the quality of cutting through, but it also has the quality of when it cuts through, then to, you could say, set free and liberate the qualities of enlightenment so that they become manifest, the qualities of compassion, the qualities of strength, and so on. So that's where the paramita of wisdom is, among the 6 paramitas, is regarded as the most important of the paramitas. And we would also say without wisdom, then the other paramitas, they don't really become proper paramitas. So at the same time, also the previous 5, they become the foundation and the necessary conditions for us to properly engage with this paramita of wisdom. So let's see what the root text says. Wisdom's higher training is now clearly ascertained. It arises from the preparation for samadhi. Through this and through the wisdom that is born from both the actual samadhi and post-meditative state, or through the wisdoms that derive from hearing, from reflection, and from meditation, vipassana is perfectly accomplished. So it's on the basis then of wisdom that we begin to really have or rather we begin to arrive at what is really the objective of the Buddhist path. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, there now follows an exposition of wisdom, the third of the 3 trainings, covering both its nature and its various categories. Essentially, wisdom is a pure intelligence that accurately knows phenomena and their ultimate nature. So, the categories of wisdom. The wisdom that is the fruit of meditation arises naturally in 3 ways. To begin with, it is the result of the preliminary training of samadhi. Later, it derives from the main practice of samadhi, which is limpid and free from all obscurations and opacity, occurring when the mind has become pliable and positive. This at length gives rise to the wisdom of perceiving, even in post-meditation, that phenomena are without true existence. So this is then how it unfolds in terms of when it's engaged on the basis of meditation. But then again, we of course arrive at that through the preceding foundations of wisdom, which is the study and then the critical reflection on what we study, which is then what we call reflection. So here, Jigme Lingpa says, through this, the host of the afflictions is destroyed. phenomena and their nature, all is understood. The city of existence is traversed. The state of no more sorrow is attained. The ascending structure of the six perfections is founded on transcendent wisdom. Okay. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, all in all, there are three kinds of wisdom: the wisdom of hearing, the wisdom of reflection, and the wisdom of meditation. Now, these are that's sort of the mainstay of the whole wisdom project, but it's important that we really are clear on what that means. The wisdom of hearing, again, talking a little bit about our culture, it's very much about us taking in a different perspective. The Buddhist teaching sees things very differently from what we ordinarily are led to believe. Well, for one thing, the Buddha tells us phenomena are impermanent. Buddha doesn't say that because he wants to be a party pooper or discourage us in any way, but it's just because of our assumption that what doesn't last should last, then we suffer. Because of our assumption that actually what doesn't really constitute real bliss or happiness, in effect, what we might just call cheap thrills, then again we suffer. We don't really have genuine happiness. And finally, we attribute solidity to what doesn't have any solidity. And this is not about us getting the math right or wrong or just being, clever or not clever. It's simply just these are the causes of suffering. So that's where the Buddha teaches in order for us to get rid of suffering. He doesn't teach because he has something great he wants to sell us, but because he has compassion and cares about us. And that's where the Buddha's teaching is then intended to liberate us from suffering. And that's where the first part of this message is then requires that we actually listen to what the Buddha has to say. And what the Buddha has to say goes against so much of what we actually believe and what we're also distracted by. So in our sort of everyday life, we are continually bombarded by what in fact is misinformation, distraction, pointlessness, silly things that grab our attention. So that's where the wisdom of hearing constitutes immersing ourselves really in understanding and hearing what the Buddha has to say and getting the spirit of that. And then the second is reflecting, which means being able to take the Buddha's teaching here and our own being here and seeing where it actually comes together. So that's where we don't just learn the message of the Buddha as something that sort of part of is information, but it's something we need to see how it's relevant for our personal experience. And that's where we need to engage with it critically, not just sort of saying, yes, sir, but actually really seeing how this is something that hits us in places where we need to do something. And it's then when we arrive at an understanding, essentially of what is what, that we know what it is that leads to suffering, what it is that frees us from suffering, that we then begin to relinquish what it is that drives our suffering and begin to cultivate what it is that brings about freedom. And that's then the wisdom of meditation. So these the three prajnas, or the three wisdoms, then are the foundation for this entire project. And that's where then Kangyur Rinpoche continues. He says, gradual training in these will result in the perfect accomplishment of vipassana. Vipassana meaning superior knowledge or greater perspective. And that then here in this context then is synonymous with primordial and non-conceptual wisdom. So we might sometimes think, oh, Vipassana, that's something that belongs to other traditions. We don't hear a lot about it in the Dzogchen or Mahamudra traditions. And that's true. The vocabulary here is slightly different, and we more talk about primordial wisdom or primordial purity, non-conceptual wisdom. But when we're talking about the path in general, then it's important that we appreciate that Vipassana is the universal objective of wisdom. The accomplishment of Vipassana is what destroys then all the confusion. It says here, this wisdom destroys the defilements that prevent the attainment of liberation and removes the cognitive obscurations that prevent omniscience. It is the unmistaken knowledge, first, of ultimate reality, the profound nature of things, and second, of all phenomena that arise within the sphere of deluded perception. So one is understanding the nature of things, but also then understanding what appears within this nature. Equipped with such knowledge, one is able to pass swiftly through the city of existence, which karma and defilements have made so difficult to cross. Thus one goes beyond suffering and reaches nirvana with ease. So we have for a long time been entangled in karma, patterning, and kleshas that perpetuate this patterning. Kangyur Rinpoche says the six transcendent perfections, generosity, and so forth, are causally interrelated and are arranged progressively in terms of subtlety and elevation. They're called transcendent because they're all combined with transcendent wisdom. So like we've looked at so far, we can see that the first 5 paramitas, they are gradually more and more subtle, passing through then generosity, discipline, patience, energy, and then samadhi. And they then constitute really the foundation for successfully achieving transcendent wisdom. But it's also only due to, actually, when there is the transcendent wisdom, the wisdom that sees selflessness, that is not, you could say, entangled in dualistic perception, that these paramitas really merit being called paramitas, transcendent virtues. So first, then, the wisdom resulting from hearing the teachings. The wisdom of hearing. So Jigme Lingpa writes, if therefore those who are still ordinary beings fail to take support of wisdom that derives from listening to teachings, their reflection and their meditation both will wander into error. The teachings thus declare that wisdom that derives from hearing is the cause of all the others. So first thing, we need to take in some new perspectives, some new ways of thinking about things. For our own sake, ordinary people who have entered the path and who are not well grounded in the wisdom of hearing the teachings are in danger of becoming pretentious and conceited about their qualities of reflection and meditation. Because of this, they run the risk of wandering into error. The Samadhi Raj Sutra says, a man who binds himself with pure discipline, but proudly fails to listen to much teaching, the fruits of his good life will go to waste, and dreadful suffering will be his lot. So that's where, of course, we could very well be incredibly virtuous and even righteous persons, and that wouldn't necessarily help us. So that's where we don't want to end up there. And also, we generally would say the sign of a student that has studied a lot is humility. The sign of a student who has meditated a lot is the absence of afflictions or kleshas. So Kangyur Rinpoche continues, indeed, the wisdom arising from hearing the teachings is said to be the cause of the wisdom of reflection and meditation. As Master Ashwagosha has said, the man of little learning is as if born blind. How can he meditate? On what can he reflect? Study then with diligence, reflect and meditate. Through this, vast wisdom will arise. Okay. The key that opens the treasure chest of Dharma. I think what I'd like to do next time is actually bring in the structural outline, because undoubtedly in this chapter it's going to be a bit dense with regards to the you could say logical progression. You know how within the Tibetan system you'll have this chapter has two parts. Then it'll say the first part is the title, part two, and then they'll say it has three parts, beginning, middle, and end. And then you'll say for the first there's 9 different sections, and for the first there's 3 different sections. And then it'll just say for the second, and then you're sort of wondering, well, this is the second of what, the previous of this section or whatever. So there's sometimes a need for a little bit of an overview of the structural outline. And I think I'll bring that in next time and have it just sitting as some graphical material, some graphic material we can have on the side. 115. This wisdom will survey the Dharma to be understood, distinguishing expedient and definitive, and different kinds of teaching, 4 implied, 4 indirect. Suchness is the nature of all things, abiding in 3 doors of perfect liberation. The meaning of this teaching is definitive. So that's where now we talk about some very important categories. Essentially what we talk about is then the expedient and definitive. So expedient is where we explain things according to, you could say, how one's present experience is, what one believes in. You have to start there. Definitive is more the absolute nature, the ultimate nature of things. So you have different sutras that take into account particular categories of students and their particular belief systems and assumptions and what they can handle. So that's all called expedient. But the definitive, these are the teachings that explain how things actually are, lacking inherent existence and so forth. So here Kangyur Rinpoche says the 12 branches of scripture which set forth the doctrine of the 2 truths are evaluated by the wisdom that arises from hearing the teaching. Okay. So for us to understand all the Buddhist teachings, which essentially are about the 2 truths, how things appear and how they actually are, and we talk about 12 branches of teachings, which I can't remember what are, but there's a number of different teachings. But basically just the whole Buddha Dharma really boils down to the teachings on how things appear and how they actually are, and understanding that. So that's where the Buddhist teaching also is incredibly profound, because it doesn't just tell you what is the absolute nature of things, what is nirvana like, but it also talks about what is it that we experience, and how is it that we get entangled in this kind of experience, and how is it that it appears to be true. Essentially, we could say the teachings on cause and effect, they're all about how things appear to us. But then again, the teachings beyond cause and effect, the ultimate nature of things, that is the actual nature of how things are. But to appreciate that, then we actually need to have that wisdom that comes from having listened to the teaching. And that's then where we talk about this appreciation or evaluation. It says here, this evaluation involves the making of 2 distinctions. The distinction between the teachings of the definitive meaning and the teachings of expedient meaning. So that's 1. And 2, the distinction between the 4 kinds of implied teaching and the 4 kinds of indirect teaching. This assessment can only be made by applying the principle of the 4 reliances. Let's just see here, what's that? Ongbachen and Gombamayngbechen. Demgong, okay. Yeah. Anyway, what we have here, when we talk about the 4 reliances, this is something that really is something that's always incredibly useful. The 4 reliances are as follows. So first is, we should rely on teaching, not on the individual. And it says here, knowledge of the Dharma comes from following a spiritual friend. However, the object of reliance is not the person of the teacher, but the doctrine that he or she expounds. One should follow a teacher only after examining what he or she says. So that's where the main thing really is the teaching. When we come to the path of the Dharma, it's important that we don't just say, oh, that's a lovely person there. It's important that we really understand what is it they're saying. So you could have a very charismatic person that completely leads you into confusion. That's just no good. Second, so that's why we also say we should rely on the meaning, not on the words. So that's why we say, since the teaching is to be implemented, one should rely on its meaning, not on its modes of expression. So that's where teachings, they might be expounded for, you say, let's say an Indian audience, 1,000 years ago. But the meaning is what's really matters. So they might talk about how, the impermanence of a cart or a plow. And we don't have carts and we don't have plows, but that's beside the point. If we can understand the meaning, which is then, in this case, impermanence, that's where we should look to the meaning, not to the words. And then again, the third one is then what we were just talking about, expedient and definitive. We should distinguish between these and rely on the definitive, not the expedient. So it says here, the meaning then has two aspects, expedient and definitive. One must rely on the definitive meaning. And though one follows the expedient teachings for the time being, one should always do so with a view to the definitive meaning. So we might, for example, meditate on impermanence, and that's good, and meditate on the truth of cause and effect. But we should also understand that when something is impermanent, it's because it doesn't have inherent existence. So that's where we should not just think, oh, things are impermanent, damn. We should understand that insight is an insight into how things truly are, and that they don't possess ultimate truth. Similarly, also, if we talk about cause and effect, that means that phenomena are always shifting according to cause and effect, means they're not stuck in being one way or another. Again, they don't have inherent existence. So that's where any teaching that we come across, we should really understand what is the ultimate implication of what is being pointed to. And then last one is distinguishing between consciousness and wisdom. That says here, the definitive meaning is comprehended by the mind. However, since intellectual assessment, however excellent, does not extend beyond the relative truth, it should not be relied upon. Reliance should be placed in thought-free wisdom that sees the absolute truth directly. So that's where for example, Shantideva would say the absolute is not the scope of the intellect. And that's where we could have the understanding of impermanence. We could even have an excellent understanding of emptiness. But that would still just be with the rational mind. And as much as you might have this excellent rational mind, that is not actually the genuine, authentic absence of delusion. That's not the ultimate wisdom. So these four, this is something also when we studied the Sword of Wisdom by Jakob Leschly Rinpoche a few years ago. This is also something that we touched on there in a big way, but it's something that comes across all the various Buddhist traditions. So rely on the teaching, not on the teacher. Rely on the meaning, not on the words. Rely on the definitive meaning, not the expedient meaning. And rely on wisdom, not on intellect. Yeah. Okay. So here then, with regards to the definitive and expedient teachings, it says the fundamental state of all phenomena of samsara, nirvana, and the path is the naturally pure expanse of absolute reality, the luminous nature of the mind itself. Transcending origination, abiding, and cessation, this state is expressed as the three doors of perfect liberation. It is empty, devoid of attributes, and beyond all expectancy. This is the definitive meaning. Now, I'd like to say we shouldn't think of this as entirely abstract. What we're talking about is essentially our being. It's the nature of our being to spin off into samsara. It's intrinsic to our being that we could also be free of the confusion that is samsara, and hence we have the potential for nirvana. And we have the path, which is what we can engage in, that takes us from the condition of samsara to the condition of nirvana. So that's, for example, if we talk about our ordinary health, or when we talk about illness and cure, and you could say the course of remedy or treatment, that's something that's intrinsic to us. If we're talking about illness, then, you know, it might be an illness that we have or not have, but we can understand that we could become sick. And if we have the fortune that our illness is something that's curable, then we simply just want to know what it is that can cure us. So that's where, basic to who we are, then we have these conditions of samsara, nirvana, and the path. That's basic to what we are, and that's the original condition of our mind. Before it's gone into samsara, before the path, before nirvana, its ground is this original open condition that's then defined in terms of being empty. It's intangible, it's devoid of any particular characteristic or attribute, and it's not something that we would arrive at through wanting something else. We sometimes refer to this as wishlessness. It's something that's there. We don't have to hope for it. We don't have to say, may I one day have this this expanse of absolute reality. It's there. It's basic to who we are. So again, that's where we want to approach the entire Buddhist path really not as something that's sort of abstract and out in the distance, but it has everything to do of who we are right here, right now. You could say it's empirical. The condition of confusion is something that we can appreciate as being real for us. The fact that it can be removed means there's the potential for nirvana. And what we can do in terms of effectively free us from the confusion, which is something that we can also verify for ourselves, the path, is also something that is immediate and present. So that's a bit about the definitive meaning. I guess we'll look at then the expedient meaning next time. And like I said, I'll try to find a way so we can have a little bit of an overview of the logical progression, what we call the structural outline. Okay. Yeah. Let's just see if there's any questions at this point. Any questions, anyone? No? All good? All right. Okay.
No, not all good, but don't feel abandoned into a monologue, Jakob. We are following and with much attention. But yeah, this part of the text is very dense, so I feel like I have the capacity of a chicken in respect to what is the path in front of me, the concentration levels, the samadhi, the wisdom, the compassion, but it's extremely beautiful, beautifully translated, beautifully written, inspiring. So,
hey, main thing is, you should set yourself the goal that you actually do want to get to the place where you're clear on this. So don't give up.
No. This is very useful not to give up.
Don't give up. We're all in the same boat, and
yeah.
It's worthwhile.
Yeah, it's a very ambitious project, but it's worth going through it.
You know, it's amazing how many things we have actually learned in this life, from just learning mathematics to geography to biology to how to drive a car, how to handle life. So we can do this as well.
Yeah, and you see the little improvements by doing it. So even they're microscopic, but they are there. So that's already a very good reward. Thank
you,
you.
Alessandra. Thank you for that. It's very relevant feedback. Okay. So we'll just conclude then with the, let's see here, the dedication. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Okay.